I'm very proud to introduce Professor Lorne Richstone.
Thank you, Alan. When I think back on all the concerts I've done here, and it's been quite a lot, I think over the past years, really for me, near and dear to my heart was this concert that I've done about Selma Merbaum. Selma Merbaum, wonderful poetry that she wrote when she was so young. 15 years old to 17. Just an amazing, really a life cut short. Who knows what she would have done had she lived, had she had not been murdered in a Nazi labor camp. So I'd like to talk about why I'm doing this program, or I want to have a talk about this program, because in light of the recent war of aggression against Ukraine by Russia, I decided that this should be the subject of my talk today. My talk today should focus on a trip that I took to Ukraine with my brother in the summer of 2018. Well, our travel time was quite limited to only a few weeks, so we decided to visit only 3 cities. Odessa. Why Odessa? Because my grandparents and who knows how many of my relatives lived there before coming to Canada, and maybe we were trying to find out if perhaps there were still relatives there, but we couldn't find any information about that. The next city, Lviv, which was just a very important city for us to see. But even most important was Chernivtsi, which was, as you might know, back in the day, was called Chernovitz. So let's see if this works here. Yeah. So the main purpose of the trip, of course, then was to research the life of Selma Merbaum, a young Jewish poet born in Chernivtsi who died at the age of 18 in a Nazi labor camp. And this was for a concert I was planning at the University of Oklahoma for May of 2019, Holocaust Memorial Day. So we first arrived in Ukraine at the Odessa airport. So I'm sure everybody knows now where Odessa is. And this is the map of Ukraine, full Ukraine. So Ukraine is really a gorgeous city, and it's often referred to as a jewel of the Black Sea, because it's situated on the Black Sea. We were particularly impressed by Odessa's 19th century buildings, monuments, and wide tree-lined boulevards. And the Odessa Passage, a shopping arcade built at the end of the 19th century, is one of the most notable examples of the architecture we saw during our visit. Just a remarkable building, isn't it? This is the exterior. And this is the interior, where they had all sorts of shops and all sorts of wonderful little restaurants. And these are, of course, all photos that I took of that trip. So another remarkable building was the Odessa Archaeology Museum, founded in 1825. And it's one of the oldest museums, not only in Ukraine, but in the whole of the ex-USSR. Wonderful example of the architecture that you would see, hopefully in the future, going to Ukraine. Of course, the famous Potemkin stairs. Well, that's one of the most recognizable symbols of Odessa. Of course, was featured in Eisenstein's 1925 silent film, Battleship Potemkin, showing the harbor as it was in 2018. So one of Odessa's most famous buildings is its opera and ballet theater, which was constructed in the neo-Baroque style and opened in 1887. Beautiful building this was, and we saw a performance in there that was just wonderful. And this is the auditorium. The architecture was designed in the late French Rococo style, great acoustics, really a grand theater, just beautiful. And here's a staircase, and you can see what kind of care they put into building interiors and exteriors of buildings in those days. It was just remarkable. Some other examples of the building, the interior of that building. So Odessa didn't have anything like the Hollywood stars, but they do have their own stars. And near the Opera House were markers honoring prominent artists, writers, and musicians who were born in Odessa. So you can see Emil Giles, Sviatoslav Richter, two of my favorite pianists, born in Odessa. Of course, Kandinsky, great artist. And of course, I'm sure you know that Isaac Babel was also from Odessa. So just great people, prominent people who were so important to the cultural scene of Odessa were born there. And there you see that in the middle of the town, we found the statue of Babel, and somebody put flowers in his lap. I thought that was just really, really nice. And of course, also Pushkin has his own museum there, and this was the statue of Pushkin just outside of his museum. So there is a museum of history of Odessa Jews, Migdal Shorashim, and it's located in the Jewish district of Odessa. And it's really hidden from view in the back of a courtyard. You would not know that that was the museum of Jewish history. It's very small when you consider the significance of the city's Jewish past. Because at the height of the early 20th century, the Jewish population of Odessa was the third highest in the world, behind New York and Warsaw. And so this museum was opened in November of 2002, quite late, by the Jewish community of Odessa, not by the state or the government. And it should be noted that previously the history of Odessa's Jewry was not exhibited or displayed in any other museum around the city. This was the first time. So, as you can see, nice exhibits depicting daily Jewish life in the 19th and early 20th century Odessa, as well as the 1905 pogrom, the Holocaust, and the Jewish resistance during the Soviet rule in the 1960s. And these are some of the rooms that I saw there, some of the exhibits. So, on to the next city, Lviv or Lvov or Lemberg, whatever you want to call that. Lviv now I say the next city on our itinerary went from Odessa, Chernivtsi to Lviv, but I'm doing that in reverse order because I'm going to spend a lot of time on Chernivtsi. So as you can see, Lviv is quite close to Poland, as I'm sure that everybody knows, and it was part of Poland and now it's part of Ukraine. These cities go back and forth between borders. So Lviv, the next city on our itinerary, proved to be really a very vibrant modern European city and very similar to cities that I had previously visited in Poland. When we arrived in Lviv, the streets were packed. I mean, when I say packed, it was really hard to get around because there were so many tourists and a lot of young people, probably because the hotel rooms and restaurant prices were quite reasonable in comparison to Western European cities. Just a remarkable find. I was so happy to visit Lviv. Now, hopefully, at some point, we'll all be able to go back to Ukraine and go to this restaurant. This restaurant was just fantastic. I think it's pronounced Bashevsky restaurant, but I hope that's how it's pronounced. And it's near the main square called the Rhinox Square. And that was just a great place. It was really our favorite place to eat during the trip to Lviv. And a lot of the menu items were dishes that I remembered my mother cooking when I was young. very much Jewish cuisine, as you can probably tell, on the right side, right panel. Lots of wonderful dishes there. So hopefully we'll all get back to Lviv and go to that restaurant. So, of course, Lviv has a long Jewish history. First arriving in the city around 1256 when it was founded. It was once one of the most important cities in Eastern Europe for Jews. Before World War II, nearly decimated the city's entire Jewish community. More than a third of Lviv population, over 100,000 people, were Jews. Just to think of that, it was a very important city for the Jewish population. So we did a city tour, and during the city tour, we stopped by the old Jewish quarter and viewed the ruins of the Goldene Reus synagogue built during the 1580 to 1595. And this was considered one of Europe's most beautiful and oldest synagogues. Nazis demolished this and the adjacent Great City Synagogue in 1942. And in 2016, a Holocaust memorial was built here. Not a huge memorial, but at least they acknowledged it quite late. 2016, it's quite late, I would think, but at least there was some kind of recognition of the Jewish past in Lviv and what happened during the Holocaust. And so here you can see what remains of that synagogue. Now, there's not much. And here's some more talking about certain people who lived there and what happened. It was a very moving experience, I have to say. So Odessa had a wonderful opera house, as I mentioned, but Lviv opera house was perhaps even more beautiful. I don't know, I don't want to compare too much, but they were both really great. But the Lviv Opera House is located near the city center. It was constructed between 1897 and 1900 in a classical neo-Baroque style. And as you can see in that photo on the left. The interior decoration incorporates elements of an Art Nouveau tradition with oil paintings, sculptures, bas-relief works by some of Poland's most celebrated artists at the time. You know, it's not that well known, Lviv. I don't know if any of you have ever been there. Certainly worthwhile visiting. But that opera house, I have to say, is one of the most beautiful and elegant opera houses I've seen. And you can compare that to those in Paris or Vienna. Really that remarkable. So I'm going to show some more photos of it because I really like this opera house. And so here you can see this grand stairway, and there is this Art Nouveau painting that I kind of grew up and I thought was just so amazing. Probably one of the patrons of the opera house. Really grand. Look at that! Isn't that amazing? Just extraordinary. I'm going to show some of the paintings that you can see along the sides now. I believe now they do sometimes like recitals and concerts there, you know, so this is not the main auditorium, but this is it could be a concert hall or a main hall at least. So just remarkable paintings, beautifully rendered. What an amazing opera house, don't you think? It's really quite incredible. So Lviv was really one of the highlights of our trip. It was just a beautiful kind of artistic sort of city. You can see outside, you know, these beautiful paintings on the buildings, and of course, great restaurants. So really a big hit for us. So now I'm going to go to what the real reason why I went to Ukraine was to visit Chernivtsi. As you can see, Chernivtsi is rather close to the Romanian border. So during the Habsburg Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was a capital city of the Bukovina region. Today, the northern half of Bukovina is part of Ukraine, and the southern half belongs to Romania. And that map shows how the city's name changed over the years from Czernowitz under the Austro-Hungarian Empire to Czernowtsi in Romania, Chernovtsi in the USSR, and finally to Chernivtsi in Ukraine as it is today. Selma's cousin, the famous poet Paul Celan, described Chernivtsi as a city where human beings and books used to live, a very literate city. When the empire dissolved in 1918, the city became, and its surrounding area became part of Romania, which in 1940 had switched from an ally of France and Britain to one of Nazi Germany. After the Red Army drove the Nazis forces out in 1944, the city and the surrounding areas were incorporated into the Ukrainian SSR. So the remaining majority of the city's remaining Jewish population, decimated in the Holocaust, moved to Israel. And in years that followed, the city became predominantly Ukrainian, and Chernivtsi, as it's renamed, has been part of the independent Ukraine since 1991. Turn of the century to Czernowitz. Postcards from the turn of the century depict people from various ethnic backgrounds, Ukrainian, Romanian, Armenian, German, Polish, and Jewish, mingling in the streets, conversing in public squares, and shopping in marketplaces. So what I find very interesting, and you're going to see this later on in one of the more recent photos from 2018, that this house or this building here was actually the theater, you know, and it remains to this very day. On the right-hand side is where the Jewish Community Center was, a huge building. So nothing really has changed much from those days as far as the buildings and architecture is concerned. So throughout most of its history, Jews accounted for 30 to 60% of the population of Czernowitz, which was aptly referred to as the Little Vienna of the East. It was the birthplace of Hasidism, and was also a center of the Jewish mysticism. It was also a center of Yiddish culture and linguistic movement, as well as a home of Yiddish writers and the site of the famous Czernowitz Conference in 1908, which is a pivotal event in the development of Yiddish as an independent language. So this is what the temple looked like around 1910. The Czernowitz temple, built in 1873, was a domed Moorish revival synagogue, and it was close to the central square. In 1941, the German and Romanian soldiers set fire to the building, but they weren't able to entirely destroy it. And the Soviets rebuilt it in 1959 as a movie theater and arcade, which is now colloquially referred to as a kinogog. Kino being movies and synagogue, just putting it together. And you can see it's a much more scaled down version of this magnificent building that was there beforehand. So many well-known Jewish figures were born or lived in the city. Before the war, the famous opera tenor Joseph Schmidt sang in the choir as a child and later served as a cantor. And this commemorative plaque can be found in the synagogue's foyer, which was very nice that they actually remarked on that and put this plaque there. However, as you can see now, what seems to be more important, Joseph Schmidt or Jurassic Park? Just totally dwarfed by this dinosaur. So I don't know if anybody's even looking at that plaque except for myself, because I was very interested in Joseph Schmidt. Many buildings, you see that's the same building, by the way, on the square. This is the theater, the opera house that we saw in that postcard from 1910. Many buildings and the monuments from Chernivtsi's Habsburg past remain to this day. Although the city seems to be far less modern than either Odessa or Lviv in 2018, I think significant modernizations have been undertaken in recent years. This is really quite interesting. This is the Museum of Jewish History and Culture of Bukovina, formerly the Jewish National House. If you remember, that was on the right side of that theater or the opera house. So this was constructed in the early 20th century when the Chernovitz had a thriving Jewish community and it was a center of Jews in Bukovina. The structure now houses a tiny two-room Jewish museum, which was opened in 2008. In the mid-90s, the metal railing, in the mid-90s, the metal railings on the stairs decorated with Stars of David were restored. This decoration was sawed off during the anti-religious communist era to form two X's. So this is really, they just left it over here so we can see on the right, this is something that they just wanted to obliterate the Jewish past during the Soviet times. But it's been mostly restored now. And this is, a few rooms from the in the museum now. A lot of it's just a little vitrines that you can't really see all that well. It seems that they're just trying to encapsulate Jewish history and put it and store it somehow and not allow it to really have much of breadth and live today. It's all just in little compartments. So we did visit the former Jewish ghetto, and there's a wonderful kosher restaurant there, and we had lunch with our guide, and just a really terrific restaurant. The Jewish area was quite poor, I think, but that restaurant was really quite nice. There is, of course, a Holocaust memorial in the front of the ghetto. So the Jewish cemetery of Chernivtsi, this is regarded as Ukraine's most beautiful burial ground. It was established in 1866 and is one of the largest preserved Jewish cemeteries in Central and Eastern Europe. This was really quite impressive. Eduard Reis, the city's first Jewish mayor, was among those buried in the cemetery. And he held the position from 1905 until he died in 1907. His mausoleum is a particularly exquisite example of Viennese secession. Really quite remarkable. And in the middle of the city, the Art Museum, located in the central square, is another example of Viennese secession art. Founded in 1988, it was housed in the former Savings Bank, which was built in 1901. And this is really quite an impressive stairway as well. The National University is designated now as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Remarkable building. It was established in 1875. With a ceiling in the main auditorium room, and this is a photo of that. Yeah, also have this grand Orthodox church called the Three Hierarchs Church, and when we went inside, there was a wedding taking place, and we decided, oh, I'll take a picture of that. So now we get to a really important part of my talk. This is a little talk more about Selma's life in Chernovitz. So I hired a guide to show us around the various places where she lived before she was deported to the Nazi labor camp in Transnistria in 1942. So the majority of what we know about Selma's life is derived from memoirs of her friends and her teachers. Her family was very poor. They barely had enough money to rent a two-room apartment with a kitchen and one large room and no utilities. They shared bath down the hall. So this is her birth, where she was born and where she lived her early life. And this was the house. And you'll see later on there's a little plaque commemorating her. But it was really hard for my guide to find the place because he had to do a lot of research because people in Chernivtsi did not know about her at all. When she was born, Chernovitz was under Romanian rule, but the Habsburg spirit still permeated the city, bestowing with a profound love of Austrian culture and German language. So she spoke German at home, and she wrote her poems in German. At an early age, she began to study literature, and her work reveals a heavy influence from those masters she studied, Heine, Rilke, Verlaine, among others. As Europe's war broke out in earnest in 1939, she began to write poetry and was already a skilled translator. Her friends and Selma, they were members of Hashomer Hatzayir Zionist youth movement, still in existence today. And they talked about current events and about right-wing populism, and were concerned about Hitler's influence in Romania because of the growing Romanian nationalist movement in Chernovitz beginning in the mid-30s. That's Selma holding the ball. And they frequently met at the Franz Josef Felsen in the Habsburgshöhe Park, a popular gathering spot for young people. And this was really interesting because my guide couldn't find this park. He never heard of Habsburgshöhe. And it turned out to be a totally different name, as you can see. I don't even know if I can pronounce it. Yuri Fetkovic, I think it's the name right now. And so when we got there, all we saw was this podest. We didn't see any sculpture at all of Franz Josef, even though it was meant to be to Franz Josef. But we did meet some students there, and there was one student who was of the same age of Selma, around 17 years old, Irina, who spoke really remarkably good English. And she had studied in the States for a year. Hardly anybody, by the way, in Chernivtsi spoke English, but she did, and it was remarkably good with English. And I was telling her about Selma Merbaum, and she became very interested in her and wanted to do a lot more research. So it was an interesting meeting for sure. So where is this statue? All right, but there it is. It was moved to another part of Chernivtsi in 2009. And this is how it looked when I visited that. And now they've done a lot of modernization and it looks a lot more beautiful. This is not, of course, from my photography. This was just done very recently. So in 1941, the Romanian military dictator Antonescu ordered the establishment of a ghetto in the city where 50,000 Bukovina Jews were imprisoned, and anyone caught outside the ghetto could be shot right away. And as you can see, they were all moved in 1941 to Transnistria, and she died, Selma died of typhus in 1942 in the Mikhailovka labor camp. She wrote 57 poems between the ages of 15 and 17, which she called Blütenlese. And they were written in incredibly beautiful, flawless literary German, addressing a young woman's romantic longings while also confronting rising anti-Semitism and nationalism. Her last poem that she wrote in the book, Tragedy, she writes at the end, "I haven't had time to finish writing." So that was the last thing that she wrote, was she hadn't had time to finish writing all her poems that she wanted to. So Blütenlese was left with a friend before her deportation, and it survived remarkably and was brought to Israel in the years following World War II. Individual poems circulated among her friends, and her poem, entitled poem, was published in an East German anthology of Jewish and Holocaust poetry in 1986 called Welch Wort, in the Kälte gerufen. And this was alongside Paul Celan's masterpiece, Todesfuge, Death Fugue. Celan insisted that the German press could include his poem in the anthology only if Selma's poem was published alongside his. And so this is how he paid tribute to his cousin. And this was the first time that anything of hers was actually published. And so now you can see that there's a lot of books on Selma Merbaum in almost all different languages. And this is really kind of important to see that she's become very well known, especially in Germany and Austria. There's even been audiobooks of her poems, and even kind of like a pop CD of her songs that were written on her poems. So quite interesting how much interest in Germany and Austria they gave to Selma. And there was a new composition competition held in Graz, Austria, for a notable setting of a poem of Selma Merbaum's called Den gelben Astern ein Lied, or a song for the yellow asters. So I find it really interesting. And there's also a house, a center dedicated to Merbaum, Selma Merbaum, called the Merbaum House in Berlin. I visited there once, and it's remarkable that her legacy was honored in Berlin in 1987 with the establishment of this house bearing her name. So a lot of interest for sure in Germany and Austria. But what about Czernowski? Well, Paul Celan once stated that he was born into a place that now fallen into historylessness. And as I discovered during my 2018 visit, most Czernowski residents have never ever heard of Selma Merbaum and were completely unaware of the city's Czernowitz past. Despite the existing Habsburg architecture and monuments, well, the Czernowski residents knew little about their city's past. This unawareness stemmed from Czernowski's experience since World War II, and it was aided by the Soviet Union's stranglehold on history education. Because of Soviet censorship, the history taught in the schools said little about the Holocaust. And furthermore, Czernowski's Austro-Hungarian past and literary achievements vanished from print and schools. So only after Ukraine gained independence in 1991 was it possible for Czernowski's residents to rediscover their Czernowitz past. And since then, the city has begun to place plaques and other commemorative markers at the homes of and workplaces of some of its greatest poets, including Paul Celan and Rose Ausländer. And in 2004, this plaque was placed on Selma's birthplace. So this was the program that I presented at OU, and the composers Alban Fries, Laurie Laitman, and Lebu Levin were featured on the program, and their songs were sung in German, English, and Yiddish respectively. Performers were Madison Breedlove, Nicole Van Avery, Dan Schwartz, who I'm sure you all know, and Jody Ann Lloyd, who recited some of Selma's poetry. So I think I have a little bit of time, and I'd like to present some clips from that concert if you'd like to hear that. So the first one is called Ich bin die Nacht, Ich bin die Nacht, I am the night, and that was written by Selma on May 6, 1941, set to music by Alban Fries in 2014. He was an Austrian composer, still alive, studied composition with Leonard Bernstein, and who offered him an opportunity to study at Juilliard School of Music. So here is Ich bin die Nacht.
Schwarze
I think I probably have time for one more song, and it's called Viglit Farmir. It's a lullaby for myself. And that poem was written on January of 1941. We don't know exact date, but that's when it was when she wrote the poem. And it was set to music by Lebu Levin in 1977. Now, Lebu Levin was a Yiddish poet who lived in Chernovitz under Romanian rule. Selma was a former student of his when he was a drama teacher at the Yiddish school in Chernovitz. After immigrating to Israel, Levin published all of Selma's poems in Yiddish in 1977 and set 6 of her poems to music. And this is one song that's very close to my heart because I actually arranged the song as a duet. So, Viglit Farmir in Yiddish. So that was a concert. So Selma Merbaum's literary contributions, particularly those related to the Holocaust, have frequently been contrasted with those of Anne Frank. Both were young persons with enormous talent and potential who, because of their youth and the time of their deaths, served as tragic icons of a world gone mad. Selma and Anne shared similar feelings about life and the world, but they expressed them in different ways. Anne kept a diary, and Selma wrote poetry. Both, however, serve as poignant reminders of what the world has lost. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
So I don't see any questions in the chat box. Andy, you willing to take a question?
Sure, why not?
Those pictures you showed of the opera houses in the beginning in, I think it was in Odessa. and
Right.
Lviv. Are those state-supported companies?
Sure,
So, and
sure,
that's,
absolutely.
so they don't have to depend on donations or ticket sales like Americans do.
Quite a different system.
Very progressive.
Yes. Well, I mean, it is like that also in most of Europe. You know, when I was at the Deutsche Oper, for instance, in Berlin, I mean, that was state-sponsored. So, and also so they could do kind of repertoire that they wanted to do without having to worry about ticket sales. Although that was also an important consideration, but it was all state-sponsored. Culture was so important in Germany and Austria, and I guess Ukraine as well. Do we know how much has been damaged in the current war? I don't think Odessa's opera house has been damaged, or Lviv. I don't know about Kyiv. I hope not. But the war is still ongoing, unfortunately, and who knows what damage will happen in the future. It's just tragic.
Well, let me ask everybody to thank Professor Lorne Richstone for today and actually for all of his contributions over the last many years. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, we hope to see you again very soon at the movies or at December JuSt lunch. Thank you very much, everybody.